Welcome to Catalyst Conversations, a podcast from the Foundation for Evangelism, where we talk about evangelism, discipleship, and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with a hurting world. We hope that this podcast series can help you start a conversation in your faith community. Dr. Stephen Gunter, Director for the Foundation's E. Stanley Jones Professors of Evangelism program, talks with Dr. Bryan Stone of Boston University School of Theology and doctoral student Reverend Gary Reynolds at UConn First Church of the Nazarene. This episode is part one of 3 episodes discussing how church can move beyond preservation or just sustaining to connection with their community and an invitational model of ministry.
With us is Bryan Stone, the E. Stanley Jones Professor of Evangelism at the Boston University School of Theology since 1998. Those 25 years reflect that he is currently the longest-serving ESJ professor on record. Bryan co-directs the Center for Practical Theology and teaches courses in evangelism and contemporary culture, theology and film, ecclesiology, and theology and culture. Bryan has also served as the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Boston University since 2010. Bryan and his wife, Cheryl, currently live on the campus of Boston University, where they've served for over 20 years as faculty and residents in a freshman dorm of 1,800 students. And I have to say that in all of my years on college and university campuses, I just cannot imagine living with freshmen all the time. It takes a special kind of person to be able to do that. Prior to moving to Boston, Bryan taught theology and ministry at Azusa Pacific University and directed the Phineas Bresee Institute for Urban Training, an internship-based program for urban ministry training in the Los Angeles area. Bryan is a native of San Diego. He and his wife, Cheryl, who is a native of Oklahoma City, attended Southern Nazarene University before Bryan went off to Dallas to earn his PhD in systematic theology from Southern Methodist University. From 1985 to 1992, Bryan founded and directed, while doing his PhD program, an urban ministry in Fort Worth called Liberation Community. Bryan served both as pastor of this ethnically diverse church and executive director of Liberation Community itself. It's a nonprofit corporation set up to provide the community development ministries for the church. Bryan's publications include many books and chapters in books, and most prominently that are relevant to our talk today and our learning today is a 2018 publication called Finding Faith Today, and also a 2018 Evangelism After Pluralism. Bryan, welcome today. We're glad to have you as a part of this conversation.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here, and thank you. Thanks to the Foundation for Evangelism for hosting this, and to Gary for having a good conversation. Looking forward to it.
Gary Reynolds serves in his 13th year as the lead pastor for UConn First Church of the Nazarene in Oklahoma, a suburb of Oklahoma City. Previously, Gary served as director for Newton Learning, an independent contractor for Edison Schools, a for-profit educational learning service, using the No Child Left Behind program, federal funds to provide educational services to students in underperforming schools. Under his directorship, he grew this program to serve approximately 40,000 students. It was a program for serving inner city elementary and middle school children as a part of a supplemental educational service, and it operated in multiple U.S. cities. From 1975 to 2003, Gary was worship pastor for various churches of the Nazarene, with attendance ranging from 200 to 1,000, including Regency Park in Tulsa, Nashville First Church of the Nazarene, and Point Loma Nazarene College Church in California. Gary is an undergraduate of Southern Nazarene University with a Bachelor in Music Ed. In addition, Gary is also an MA in Religion at Point Loma Nazarene University and is currently enrolled in the DMin program of the Nazarene Theological Seminary, scheduled to complete his dissertation in June of 2024. Gary, welcome this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Gunter, and I am pleased to be a part of this. What an exciting event for me. I am in the process, obviously, of doing dissertation research, and when I met Dr. Stone just a couple of weeks ago in a DMin program, The fact that I would get to have a one-to-one with him is just thrilling to me, because I think that I can pose some questions to him and he might be able to help shape them in most productive ways possible. So I'm grateful for this opportunity.
It's important for the people who have signed on for this learning experience that we help them to understand the contextuality in which this conversation is going to be taking place. The conversation is driven by a highly intentional program that Gary has initiated at the Yukon Church of the Nazarene. Every church has a context, and every context carries with it a certain set of implications for how ministry must be done in order to be effective in that setting. Gary, with that in view, would you please kind of set us up here for our conversation this morning?
Certainly. And I appreciate the mention of context, because when I became pastor of this church, after serving in various communities around the U.S., the thing that drew me to this church was its motto of being Christ-centered and community-connected. I knew right away that Christ-centered is certainly the heart of any Christian church, but community-connected is the one that intrigued me. And that was the issue that I had given to myself to after 30 years of service within the church. When I came to this church and identified this with the church board and asked the question, how are you community connected? There was no answer. It was really evident that their theology was good. Their practices had kind of gotten lost. So along the way, it became incumbent on me to study this, to think about this, and then serving as a district secretary on the Southwest Oklahoma district of the Church of the Nazarene, I also discovered at least 9 other churches that are on what was called the in jeopardy of closing list. When I began to ask, how does one get on that list? More importantly, how does one get off that list? Again, there was little answer from the district advisory board. So it became pretty evident to me that there might be some reading and study that I needed to do. That's where I took on this call, or this invitation to become a part of the DMIN program, which talks about intercultural studies and leadership development. And this just seemed to suit me very, very well. At present, I'm in a development researching for a dissertation topic which deals with churches who are or should be community connected. I have come to believe that there is a natural tendency for small churches, particularly those under 125 in attendance, and for churches of long standing, more than 50 years, that something happens. They become fixated on the need to be sustained, or sustainability becomes a current conversation. And it becomes so fixed that sustainability becomes the issue rather than the missional nature of the church. What I see in that is an inward turn, and that inward turn means we're going to make sure that charity begins at home, a phrase that I just heard recently at my own board meeting, a phrase I want to address pretty quickly. The cultural issue that I think that is at large for me is, how is it that churches make this turn? What is it that influences them? What are the cultural implications and the awarenesses that people have? And I'm coming to believe that this is an unaware process, that in fact people make this turn without necessarily thinking through where this came from or what influenced them to be this thing. Their practices seem to replicate this belief that the heart of the church is caring for the church, while the neighborhood surrounding the church, which really is the answer to their sustainability, gets lost in the conversation. So I'm leaning toward one possible cause of inward turn and its resultant dilution of the size and influence of the church in the community to be an unknown embrace of culture, as evidenced by a local church's practices over against its theology. I hope to be able to prove that overcoming this embrace necessitates much more than new programs and practices of the church. It necessitates a new awareness of the shaping influences that have caused this embrace of culture. I'm positing that the awareness of these shaping influences offers the possibility of change that can turn the church outward toward an outward embrace of community and to be realigned with the mission of God, which I believe Scripture leads us to believe, that God blesses God's people so that they might be a blessing to the community. That's kind of where I am, and I'm hoping for Bryan Stone to be able to lead me in all the places necessary.
Good luck.
Well, I've known Bryan through the years in a lot of ways, in a lot of different sets and contexts. And one thing I know about Bryan is that he is spontaneous and he always has a fresh take on things. So, Bryan, how about you give us your perspective on what Gary has set up as his problematic in his ministry setting?
Yeah, and I have questions as well I would like to ask, but we can also maybe come back to those, but trying to understand the context. First, I would say that Gary's church is not unique. And he already mentioned that there were several that he could identify even on his own district. But I think this is a pattern and a reality for a lot of congregations, certainly in the United States. Already, you had that in other parts of the world like that have gone a different direction. But for the United States, I think that's increasingly the case. I'd like to know, how old the church is and how long it's been around, and a little bit more about sort of the history that's led to this point. Were they ever really engaged to begin with, or is this, and how have you seen this change? The other thing I'd like to know a little bit more about is your use of the word culture, whether you're meaning that culture, an external culture, the surrounding culture, and that's what's shaping the church, or do you mean it more that there's a kind of culture within the church that has kind of developed over time, of an insular, kind of inward-looking, kind of focused not so much on mission or thinking of mission as just one thing you do? How can you say a little bit more about that? And I think that'd be helpful as we launch into the conversation further.
Bryan, you've given us basically, as I practice reflective listening here, you've given us, as I understand it, two questions. One is, have Gary tell us a little bit more about the history of the church, and then the issue of how long, or was there a time when the church was not inward looking, and that is demonstrably reflected in their history in some way? Gary, how about it?
Yes, the church is 98 years old. Before I came 12, 13 years ago, it had been in a probably decadal period of decline, from a high of about 350 people down to roughly about 100 people. It was evident through the narratives, through the stories that I picked up as I did my best to learn the history of the church the first year or so, was that this church had been very engaged in its community. It had created softball teams, and along with softball teams, there was this relational development within the teams, people that attended the church, and people began to follow them towards this church. And so again, there was a sense in which they were reaching out to the community. They had various other activities in the community, but softball was probably the biggest draw because it is situated, this church is situated on 15 acres of land. And they had the desire for the community to be able to take advantage of that land, but there was no program or development of how that might happen. So along with that slow demise as the church aged, people who were on the softball team suddenly were too old to be on the softball team. When you have 12 pitchers and no outfielders, you've got a problem. They didn't think about how to integrate newer people into that team. They didn't seem to have, because they had seemed to kind of cull the people that they wanted, and their church had become what they wanted it to be. They were very self-satisfied with the numbers of people that were attending, so the buildings were full. And so they actually built a new building, a larger edifice that included a gymnasium as well as a worship center and obviously teaching areas within the church. They became what I had perceiving as I hear the stories, unaware of the fact that they had left the neighborhood behind.
Well, and say a little bit about how their neighborhood also changed.
The demographics of Yukon have continued to embrace multiple cultures, particularly Latino, African American cultures, while the church itself for many years has been singularly a white congregation. When I first came and noted that there was a large Latino group gathering in Yukon, several board members, they said to me, well, no one in our town is Latino, no one speaks Spanish. I immediately took an opportunity to take them to the local grocery store and then walk down the aisles with them and pointed out how General Mills had decided that Kellogg's no longer could just print the cereal boxes in English, but now they all had to be in Spanish. And we found that throughout the supermarket. And I asked the question, what do you think they know that we don't? And again, there was just a lack of concern or lack of an interest in such a change. But certainly the demographic has shifted to multiple other cultures. It also has shifted because younger generations that have moved to this town are taking advantage of its relatively economically beneficial place within the neighborhood. It's close to Oklahoma City, so it allows people to live in suburbia and also to maintain jobs in the greater metropolitan area.
When we were talking about this over dinner and you mentioned charity begins at home, I said, but it's kind of a problem when charity stays at home.
That's the very intention that that's my intention to bring up that conversation again. And I've been resourcing even some of the scriptural references to such a belief. I think charity as a philosophy, charity begins at home as a philosophy began probably in the 1600s, at least there's some identity markers about that. But the scriptures not only allow that we should care for our families, it seems as a clear test of scripture, but that we should also be aware of that there are people who are in the larger family, that Jesus himself re-identifies families when he says those who are his family are those who hear the word of God and do it.
Implicit, it seems to me, in everything that you're saying is that there have been a multiplicity of changes that have gone on in the immediate environs of the church, culturally, socially, and linguistically, but that the church has remained something of an island in which that's kind of over there, that's out there, but that's not here. Is that unfair to make that assessment of the congregation?
I think that's accurate, and from the leadership from the district and the encouragements from the district, it's always been marketed towards adaptability of the congregation, but that adaptability seems to always be, again, an inward bent. So the homogeneous unit of church growth mentality seems to really take hold here and is rooted here, rather than recognizing this, the neighborhood has changed and we're not reaching it.
I'm curious, I was talking with this about a colleague at the Foundation for Evangelism about your project and our conversation today. And she made the comment, if Gary's not careful, he's going to turn over the fruit basket and he's going to have a mess on his hands.
I think I kind of already have that, because in the course of the last 12 years, we have helped this church be established in the community as a community center. So much so that this facility, both building and grounds, are busy 7 days a week now. Whereas when I first came, it was pretty much a Sunday morning, Wednesday church, with the hope that they would reach out to the community with little or no communication with that community. But now the community literally comes to this place so that triple or quadruple the Sunday morning attendants are present in this building and facility. However, the lingering issue for me early on was, how do I connect this local congregation that has been centering on itself, even though it has the theology and the language that says we want to reach our world. The world was literally within its grasp, and no one seemed to have any desire to offer a cup of water to the softball teams that were now on the platform, or to show up with the scouting programs that could use some help just setting up tables and chairs. It was just, we're glad that they're here, but they're on their own, and we're focused on more spiritual things and they're focused much more on physicality and the development of young people.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Catalyst Conversations. We invite you to use this and our other episodes to start or keep a discussion going in your community. We hope they inspire you to begin building a culture of evangelism and discipleship to transform the world. Go to foundationforevangelism.org, that's all spelled out, or look for Catalyst Conversations wherever you get your favorite podcasts.